Good afternoon, and welcome to Ariel Rubinstein's public lecture on John Nash, A Beautiful Mind and Game Theory. I'm Jim Albrecht. I'm the chair of the economics department. I have two tasks, both of which are pleasurable. The first task is to thank a couple of people. I want, first of all, to thank Luca Anderlini, who has been the organizing genius behind all of this. Second, I want to thank Marcia Suss, who is our department administrator, who has done all of the practical things to make this fly. And third, Luca tells me that I should thank the audiovisual people because they've actually been quite fantastic. So that was task 1.5. Task number 2, which is also pleasurable, is to introduce the introducer. So I'm happy to introduce Dean David Lightfoot of the Graduate School, who will introduce today's speaker. David?
One of the things I enjoy about the economics department is they're always having these great speakers in, and often get me to introduce them. So we've had Jeffrey Sachs and Paul Krugman and more treats in store. And I hope that we can reciprocate. But you'll understand what that means when it's done. Ariel Rubinstein was educated at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, got all of his degrees from there, bachelor's in mathematics, economics, and statistics, master's degrees in economics and mathematics, and PhD in economics. And he's now professor of economics at Tel Aviv University. Spends a lot of his time in this country, has been spending time at Princeton for several years, and more recently at NYU. He's had many awards and honors, as you could imagine. He is fellow of the Econometric Society, foreign honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences for about 10 years, foreign honorary member of the American Economic Association, fellow of the Israeli Academy of Sciences, and plus honorary degrees. And he has been elected as president of the Econometric Society for next year, for 2004. And he's had visiting positions at a whole bunch of places. There are several books, 4 of which are listed on his website, and over 70 scholarly papers. If he were a computer scientist, people would say he's almost ready for tenure, but he's an economist, and for economists, 70 is a lot. His major work has been results in bargaining theory, the first major paper going back about 20 years, and modeling bargaining explicitly as a game that could then be solved was an open problem. There have been several attempts to crack it that had failed, and then Ariel stepped in and gave a beautiful answer. And that's become so pervasive in economics that apparently economists often teach Rubinstein bargaining. Ariel doesn't call it Rubinstein bargaining, and apparently he calls it alternating offers bargaining. So when you hear alternating offers bargaining, if you hear that this afternoon, read Rubinstein bargaining. And this is all part of game theory, which has had applications in many areas. I've been more aware of it through evolutionary biology and the work of John Maynard Smith in particular. Now, this bargaining theory, the previous really important results on bargaining theory are due to John Nash. And what he worked on is known as axiomatic bargaining theory. And John Nash will be the subject matter of Ariel's lecture today. We are all supposed to have done some homework and I, for one, am keen to know if I got the right answers to the problems. And I don't expect to learn that this afternoon. Please welcome Ariel Rubinstein.
Thank you very much. 1973. I came across the word Nash for the first time. I was a student at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I encountered the word Nash in a course entitled Introduction to Game Theory. Two of the central concepts in game theory at the time, Nash equilibrium and Nash bargaining solution, jumped out at me again and again. Nash was then just a short adjective attached to two abstract concepts. As you know, not much importance is attributed to the names of concepts in formal disciplines. If the concept of equilibrium had been called after Cournot, who had already considered the same idea in a specific context back in 1838, or if it were called alpha equilibrium, or even if it was called the Smiley equilibrium, it would have made no difference to me. I must have thought that the word Nash made a reference to a particular person, but I guess I was sure that this Nash was long dead. Autumn 1980. I finished my doctoral studies the previous year. 5 years earlier, I realized that what fascinates me in economics is the attempt to use mathematical models to think about life, real life, the way that people reason and interact. And I realized that game theory has a prominent place on the bridge between the real world and the abstract. During this autumn, I had the opportunity to visit for the first time Princeton. I heard students speak about a crazy genius strolling on campus, spending long time in the cafeteria with piles of computer printouts, reading newspapers that others had left on the tables. This crazy person could be seen traveling again and again on the Dinky. The Dinky is the train line linking the campus with Princeton Junction. Rumor had it that the man was busy with strange calculations. It was said that one student had dared to approach this man and talk with him, and that the man had even helped the student. It was hard for me to pick him out from among the so many strange people on the campus of Princeton. One afternoon, I happened to come to Princeton for a seminar in the economic theory workshop. And before the lecture, I asked one of my hosts to take me to the cafeteria and show me this mysterious person. He looked out towards one of the tables and with a secretive glance told me, "That's Nash." The man, whose name was more a part of my professional vocabulary than anyone else, was hunched over a table, sloppily dressed, with a long coat, and if I remember correct, with old sneakers. A lonely, solitary figure in this cafeteria, which resembled the dining hall of Oxford College. It goes without saying that I did not approach him. It was not just due to shyness. I was also scared to approach and speak with a crazy man. Game theory. Whoever came up with the name game theory was not only a genius in mathematics, he was also a genius in marketing. Imagine that the theory has been called models of rationality and decision-making in interactive situations. Who would be interested in a theory with a name like that? The word game is a playful sound, young, accessible. All of us love to play games, board games, computer games, political games, other sort of games that you can imagine. Add to this the fact that the vocabulary of game theory includes the word strategy and solution, and we have a real celebration. We all are searching for a solution for the conflict in the Middle East, and we are all frustrated experts in the American strategy in Iraq. So perhaps herein lies the lost box of magic that can help us to be better at playing the games we are already playing in any case. It's not that simple, and I will try to explain, but first, to be fair, I should say that some of the things I will say are not indisputable, namely, they are disputable. I think that the body of knowledge called game theory is a collection of formal models that introduce and enable the analysis of pattern of thinking, of rational and strategic human thinking. Wow, this sounds awful, and I will explain a bit. In game theory, as in most of economics, we think of a rational person as one seeking to advance a well-defined goal in an optimal way. When required to act, the decision maker in economics asks himself what is desirable and what is possible, and does what is best in his own subjective view in light of the objective possibilities. So the manager of a company who always seeks to minimize the firm's profits is rational in this sense. An employer who chooses a worker by maximizing the sum of the digits in the social security number is very rational in this sense. Individual who is only concerned about someone else is rational even if this concern harms what we regard as his own existential interest. On the other hand, someone who does something because he was told to do so by an angle, or because this was the second thing that occurred to him, or because it's almost the best, or someone who tries hard to do the impossible, I know some people like that, is not necessarily rational in the customary usage of economics. Now, not every decision problem is a problem for game theory. I'm about to leave my house. I consider whether or not to take an umbrella. Very serious problem. Usually we think about the situation as the decision problem that is not a game. Probably I ask myself what are the chances of rain, and I have in mind a sense of pleasure or suffering I would experience in all four possibilities. I am with or without umbrella, and it's rainy or not. But if on the other end I believe that there is a rain god up there in skies who is busy tricking me, or if I'm going out for a walk under a single umbrella with my partner who is supposed to arrive from a different place, and both of us wish very much to have just one umbrella in our possession, then my rational decision must be influenced by my expectations of my wife's behavior, and the situation becomes a game. A game is a situation where each decision maker is required to make a strategic judgment in the sense that his expectations of the behavior of others enter into his calculations. In other words, game theory deals with situations in which decision makers think rationally and put themselves in the shoes of another person or another the god of rain or whoever before reaching a decision. March 2002. I bring my son Yuval to the first meeting of a chess class for beginners. Erika Landau, she's a famous Israeli educator, opens the semester and with warm words addressed straight to the hearts of the kids. She says with great emotion something like the following: "Children, I attribute great importance to the game of chess because..." Why? Because it will lead you to look at other children from their point of view. I'm thinking to myself, what a nice approach she has to calculate thinking about others via a game of chess. It's reminded me, I remember at the time, what an economist, famous economist who was named John Macmillan, wrote in his book when he summarized a chapter on managing negotiations with the following quotation: "What advice for negotiators does game theory generate?" he asks, and he answers, "The most important idea we have learned is the value of putting yourself in the other person's shoes and looking several steps ahead." What excitement for me, going with my son to this chess course, and here game theory jumps at me again. But after the initial excitement, I wonder, and I would like to share with you my wonder. It's plausible that game theory or chess encourage you to think of the situation from your opponent's perspective, but only in order to do what is best for yourself. This could include empathy or resentment towards the other person. Furthermore, advancing strategic thinking is not obviously a good thing. The evaluation of strategic thinking should depend on the goals which are served by better strategic reasoning. I believe that Erika Landau, the Israeli educator, made actually a false connection between strategic thinking and the development of empathy. Does the game of chess or game theory develop empathy for the other player? I am very, very doubtful. Educational missions like this remain the purview of kindergarten teachers. This is also probably the mission of films like A Beautiful Mind, which encourage us to regard the mentally ill person from his perspective rather than with a view towards fixing him. Let us play a little bit game theory, and among the questions I ask you to address, and thank you for the cooperation, I ask you via the site gametheory.tau.acil to answer several questions, and one of them is a game which is usually attributed to Basu. The story, just to remind you and to tell those of you who did not enter into the site, the naughty guys, basically the story is the following. There are two players, and you are one of the players, and each of the players has to choose an amount between a number, an integer, between 180 and 300. The story is that both players are paid the lower of the two chosen amounts. So if I pick 200 and he picks 210, we both get what numbers I say? I forgot. 200 and 210, so both we got 200. Not exactly, because $5 are transferred from the player who chose the larger amount to the player who chose the smaller one. So I choose 200, he chose 210, I get 200 plus 5, he will get 200 minus 5. In the case that both players choose the same amount, they both receive that amount, and no transfer is made. And the question that I ask you, it was a sort of a survey question, of course, what is your choice? What would be your choice if indeed you would play such a game? Okay, is the game clear? Now, the classic game theory analysis of the game, of course, requires, actually any analysis of such a situation requires also additional assumption about the motives of the players. Otherwise, what can we say about it? Maybe that I want as less money as possible. Well, it's usually assumed, the quite reasonable assumption, that the only thing that is important, I'm not sure that it's the only thing which is plausible, but in any case, it's usually assumed that the only thing that is important to each player is how much money he wins in the game, and the more money, the better. Okay? Game theory, I should say immediately, also allows for discussion of the situation with players who bring other considerations into account. And other considerations that very naturally could get into account are such as, I don't want to appear to be petty by trying to earn a few dollars at the expense of my dear opponent, or the opposite. I don't want to be the champ who at the end of the game has paid this bastard. So these are the two things that could enter into account and could affect the analysis of the situation as a game. But traditionally, again, let me say that unfortunate convention has taken root when we say game theory predicts in the context of a game like this. We are indeed assuming usually that the only thing that the players care about is the sum of money that will remain in the pocket at the end of the game. Now, of course, it's clear that we talk about a strategic decision. The best action from my point of view definitely depends on the other players, or my expectations about the other players' move. Should I choose 300? This is the larger number. I cannot pick higher than that. Well, the choice of 300 is clearly not rational. Why? Because regardless, or I should say it's irrational regardless of what I believe the other player will do. It's better for me to go, even if I believe that he will choose 300, it's better for me to say 299. It's better for me actually to go down to strictly below the maximum of what I believe the other player might choose, and therefore the choice of 300 definitely is not rational, whatever beliefs I choose. Should I choose 299? Well, there are expectations that could lead a rational person to choose 299. If I think that E will choose 300, it's best for me to choose 299. I'll get 299 plus 5. That's the best that I could do. Definitely better than 300 when I will get only the 300. All expectations justifying 299 attributes a positive probability to the event that he is going to choose 300. But putting myself in the shoes of the other player, I realize that these expectations are inconsistent with the belief that my opponent indeed acts in a rational way, because we have just seen that the choice of 300 is never rational. So 299 may be rational, but it's not rational if I put myself in the shoes of the other player and I realize that he will not choose 300 if indeed he is rational as well. But probably I think that he thinks that I think rationally. Namely, I need also to put myself, to think how he puts himself in my shoes, and that will not choose 299 as well. And probably I should think about how he puts himself in my shoes, putting myself in his shoes, etc., etc. I start not to follow myself. This type of thinking is driving one crazy. I think that she does not think that I think that she will smile if I approach her. This is has definitely a meaning, a logical meaning, but it's not very, it's quite an annoying statement, whatever it means about her smile. August 93. I gave a lecture at a conference in Maastricht, Holland, and the work I presented and analyzed was a game theoretic example that my co-author Michele Piccione and myself called the paradox of the absent-minded driver. In this paper, there was a story about a driver driving on the road, and he knows that even that when he reaches the second intersection, he will not remember whether he already passed the first intersection. Very common situation, I'm sure, in your life. Considerations like this were attributed to the driver. I don't recall whether I have thought in the past that I will not recall that I passed the first intersection, things like that. At the end of the lecture, a somber young man approached me and said in a very monotone voice that once upon a time he had visited Princeton and had thought about similar example. He had begun to work on the example, so he told me, but felt that he was going crazy and stopped. This man, this phantom, told me that and disappeared. I've never seen him again. Now, Nash equilibrium escapes the whirlpool of the I think that he think by assuming that what I think about him is really what he does. In other words, Nash equilibrium is an answer to the question, what will happen, which has two characteristics. First, everything attributed to a player is the best for him given what he attributes to the other players. And second, what he attributes to the other players is actually correct. In other words, the answer to the question what will happen, according to Nash, is anything which is consistent with the assumption that individuals behave rationally and with the assumption that the player entering the shoes of the other player or players gets to the same conclusion that those players get. Nash was not the first one to use this concept, but Nash was the first to formulate this in a general and a very elegant way, and he was the first to define conditions for the situation that ensure the existence of what we call now Nash equilibrium. This is actually the interesting mathematical part of the economic work of Nash. Let's go back to Basso's game. What are the Nash equilibria for this game? Could it be an equilibrium that one player says 250 and the other 240? No. I say 250, he says 240 is not equilibrium, because for me it's better in such a case, if 250 is not optimal, it's better for me in such a case to go down to 239. I'll get more than the 240 that I get today. Now, of course, the argument will always work, except for one case where we cannot go any lower, namely the case that both players choose the number 180. And that's actually indeed equilibrium. He chooses 180, I choose 180, that's equilibrium. I cannot do better than getting the 180. If I'll say another higher number than 180, I will get actually less than 180. So it's even a strict equilibrium in sense. I should say also, so that's the only Nash equilibrium for this game, and the fact actually does not change if instead of $5 we'll talk about another positive sum. Whatever is the positive sum that will be transferred from the high guy to the lower guy, then the only equilibrium will be for the two guys to choose 180. So what will happen, we asked again and again in life, and here we received a very sharp answer. By the way, this is quite rare. But in this case, we got a very sharp answer. The Nash predicts that, or the single Nash equilibrium is that the two players choose the number 180, hallelujah, Nash. Okay, so is this answer, unequivocal answer, a basis for advising a friend to do what to do in this game? Namely, should I advise you guys to choose 180? This depends, of course, on what people actually do. Does the equilibrium describe the behavior of the individuals? Well, you are individuals, so let's see at the distribution of your own answers. Ready? Go. Well, ready, go. Yes. Okay, so I should say that this, I gave this lecture already in several places. Tilburg, it's in Holland. Israel actually is a collection of 3 universities, Tel Aviv, Haifa and Beersheba, Technion and Beersheba. LSE is in London, UBC is in Vancouver, GTU is you. These are the answers. The first thing that you see here is that there is a lot of regularity in the results. The graphs, I mean, I'm not a person who works with data usually, but when I see it, I'm quite amazed. The graphs are very, very similar. The 300 is chosen by something between 52 or 54 to 60% of the people. The Nash equilibrium action 180 is chosen between 9% to 12% of the people. In your case, only 10% of you guys chose the Nash equilibrium action. Almost 56 or 57% chose the 300 that we already show in the first step that it's very irrational to do. So, does social science exist in the sense either any regularity in behavior? I think that, for me at least, it's quite, as I say, it's quite amazing that when I see this sort of regularity in 5 different countries with quite different people. So there is a regularity. But this regularity has nothing to do with Nash equilibrium. By the way, an interesting fact, an interesting issue which I started to investigate only in the last few months is a correlation between the time it takes a subject to respond to the question, to a question, and the answer. And it's something which I still have to develop, but I find this graph quite interesting. What you have here is some sort of, you have the median time that it took a guy who answered 180 to answer. Here is the guys who answered between 181 and 294, how long does it take them to answer, and so on. The amazing thing is that the guys who answered between 295 and 299, it takes them very significantly much more time to think than anything else. So I think that's something we can actually learn from this, which is that it seems that the 300 is more or less, you see these guys between 181 and 294, most of them, there are not so many guys, and these guys probably just wrote a number. We didn't think so much about the problem. The 300 is probably the anchor. The 300 is the anchor, and we move from the anchor towards something which is a little bit less, and a little bit less takes more time to think about. Much more has to be thought and done about this. Let me put this aside. Let's look at another game. This time, let's talk about hoteling. Hoteling game took originally place along what he called a main street of a town. Here I have revised the story. There are 7. This is the geography. Here is a beach. It's a little bit not very logical figure, but you know. So here are seven buildings. There is a strip along the coastline, and there are in the stories that I ask you to respond to, there are 3 cafes which are competing for the market. All of the competitors expect the residents of this coastal road to patronize the cafe which is closest to the residents. And I think that this is quite a realistic assumption. The cafes in this game only compete for choosing the location. In reality, probably there is also price competition, but we will assume here that the price of coffee is constant and the quality is constant. The only thing which makes difference is the location. And the competition is about capturing as large portion of the market as possible. The choices are, so for each of the cafes, the choice was, this was the problem that you had to choose, that you saw, you had to choose a number between 1 and 7 with the interpretation, you choose, let's say 3, means your cafe will be in location 3. You don't know where the other guys are going to put their cafe places, and you do it with the aim to increase the share of the markets that, of residents that will come to your cafe place. Now, the game with only, I ask you to respond to the situation with when you compete against 2 cafes, but actually, let's talk first about a simpler game, which is the case where there are only 2 cafes, namely you compete only against 1 competitor. Now, the game with 2 guys has a unique Nash equilibrium, and the unique Nash equilibrium is for both to be allocated in the center. I choose 4, he chooses 4 is optimal, so it's optimal for me to choose 4 if he chooses 4, because any move will just decrease the share of the market that I get. Now I get half of the market. If I move E, if E is here, and I will move to 5, I will get only 5, 6, 7. 3 is less than 3.5, so I cannot gain by moving from this equilibrium action, and it's simple to see that with 2 guys, the only equilibrium is for both to be in the center. At the LSC, I offered this problem with just 2 competitors, not like the case that you were asked to respond to, and the results were those. So there were 643 subjects, about 75% of them chose the center. Wonderful. So here is an affirmation of the predictability of game theory. These are very good news for someone looking for the prediction of reality in game theory, since the game is quite an archetype to many other familiar situations. The most well-known situation, which is more or less described by a game situation like that, is a political game in which the 7 buildings are replaced by political positions, let's say along the axis right to left or left to right, and the competitors are actually candidates which locate themselves along the axis in order to win as many votes as possible, assuming that each voter will vote for the candidate closest to his political, ideal political view. This game was brought often to illustrate the logic of competition between 2 candidates in a world with a single one-dimensional issue, and political scientists often claim that in a 2-parties world there is a convergence of position towards the median point, and this game was brought to prove that this fact in life is as a logic. But I see these numbers, looks very nice, but it's, let me say, it's still too early to celebrate about the predictive value of game theory. What happens if we move to the version which you had to respond to? And to remind you again, you had to respond in a situation where you compete against 2 other competitors. There were 3 competitors in this case. Well, in this case, there is no Nash equilibrium at all, at least not with pure strategies. If the 2 other guys are in 4, it's not optimal for me to choose 4, because if I choose 4, I get only 7 divided by 3. If I move to 5, I will get 3 of the houses, when 3 is above 7 divided by 3. So all of them located in the center is not equilibrium. In this case, there is what we call symmetric mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, and it's interesting that the only symmetric mixed strategy equilibrium here is 0, 0, 40, 20, 40, 0, 0. That's the only symmetric mixed strategy Nash equilibrium. The meaning of it is that if I expect that the other two guys will randomly be selected according to this distribution, then it is strictly optimal for me to be located only in the points 3, 4, 5. It's strictly non-optimal for me to be in any of the other 4 points. Now, so the prediction of Nash is that your behavior will be more or less distributed 0, 0, 40, 20, 40, 0, 0. Now let's go to your results. Results of the Georgetown University students. Okay, so this is the Nash equilibrium. These are the results in UBC. You're not unique. And these are the GTU, quite similar. The number indeed is, the choice here of the center is much less than it was at the LSE with 2 competitors. Instead of 75, we have 41, and here we have 42% of you chose the center. But compare these distributions with the Nash equilibrium distribution, almost no connection. About 25% of you chose 1, 2, 6, or 7, which is very far from anything which is from the, it's very far from the support of the mixed strategy Nash equilibrium. But in any case, the shape of the behavior is extremely different than the shape of the Nash equilibrium. I should say, although, that when I calculate here what is the value, assuming that the other guys chose their locations according to your distribution, what is the expected value for me to choose each of the point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, then I do get a flat, more or less a flat line here. Namely, it is almost optimal to choose 3, 4, and not only 5, assuming that you guys are located your positions as coffee owners according to the distribution that I find in your results. So, as I say, the results are quite different from the Nash equilibrium prediction. I believe that what we do see here actually is not something which is connected with Nash equilibrium. What we see here is a demonstration of something which psychologically is very natural, which is a strong tendency of people to choose middle in problems with significant uncertainty. If I don't know what to do, I choose more or less the middle. This is a very natural tendency, and I guess this is the explanation of the 42% here and the 41% at UBC that choose the center, and not anything less different than that. But let me think for a second positively and say that Nash equilibrium helps us indeed to explain the fact that the Republican and Democratic parties in the US are nearly identical. I don't think that's exactly the case, but let's say that that's indeed the explanation for this fact, which is also not very correct. Is Nash responsible for this realization? Not at all. Here is what Otelling himself wrote in 1929. It's beautiful to read him because, it's 1929. It's many years ago. And here what he wrote. So general is this tendency that it appears in the most diverse fields of competitive activity, even quite apart from what is called economic life. In politics, says Otelling, it is strikingly exemplified. The competition for votes between the Republican and Democratic parties does not lead to a clear drawing of issues, an adoption of two strongly contracted positions between which the voter may choose. Instead, each party strives to make its platform as much like the others as possible. I look at Otelling work in 1929, I look at Cournot 1838, and I ask myself whether indeed Nash equilibrium is really so significant. After all, many economists have used Nash's concept of equilibrium without generalizations or existence theorem long before Nash was born. So was Nash's contribution really so critical to the development of game theory? Question mark. August 1985. In 1985, I was a fresh young lecturer at the Hebrew University, and one day a letter from the Nobel Prize Committee landed in my mailbox, asked me to write a report on the state of game theory. Of course, I was very flattered and also very surprised. Only later I realized that the selection for the Nobel Prize includes identifying important fields and potential candidates within the fields by turning to people who are at the beginning of their academic careers, which was, of course, my case. Well, but I was flattered, so I did this job, and I opened the report with a very banal statement about the centrality of game theory to economic theory, as well as to other fields. When I came to the part about candidates, I mentioned the name of 4 people, some of whom have won the prize already and some who may yet receive it in the future. And then I added another paragraph on a 5th candidate, which was, I singled him out, John Nash. I described John Nash as the one scholar who was outstanding in this group. I mentioned that he still lived in Princeton and due to personal reasons had stopped working, but many years ago, but that the 3 articles he wrote in 1950 to 53 were the most important and inspired studies of game theory and of economic theory since von Neumann and Morgenstern. I'm sure that my words had no impact on the selection of Nash, but still I wonder about myself. When I wrote these words, I was sure that Nash had suffered an injustice in that he had not yet been awarded the Nobel Prize before. I felt he was blamed on being insane. But was Nash's contribution really so critical to the development of game theory? Had I succeeded myself in drawing the appropriate borders between seeking to right an injustice and a pure academic assessment? Was it even possible for me, or to anybody else, to have made such a clear distinction? Question. Let me go back to games. Another game that you responded to is called the ultimatum game. There are 2 individuals, and they can divide between them, let's say, $100. One player can propose how to divide the sum. The second player can just say yes or no. In other words, the one who makes the offer is, the proposal is in the position that we call of making a take it or leave it offer. This is a very common situation in life. Have you ever tried to argue or to bargain with the cashier at a supermarket about the price of milk? I hope you did not. There are many people in the world who, when offered a job for very low salary, can not dare to come with a counter offer and can just say yes or no, and better they say yes. Sometimes the game is played in the imaginations of politicians who believe that they are in the position to make an offer that the other side can only accept or reject, and surprisingly discover that the other side can not only say no, but can even open fire. To complete the description of the situation as a game, we must of course explain the interest of the individuals, and again, it is very customary, probably unfortunate customary, to assume that each player is only interested in attaining as much money as possible. Again, a solution concept must be put into operation. In this type of a game, actually we implement a variation of Nash idea, which we call subgame perfect equilibrium. Subgame perfect equilibrium assumes that each player, whenever he needs to make an action, to do something, he does whatever leads to the best results from the point of view that he has to make a decision, while correctly predicting the other player's behavior in the future. From these assumptions, the game theoretical solution for the ultimatum game is very simple. It must be that the offerer gets $100 or probably 99. Why? Because as long as the other player receives something greater than 0, he must say yes. So it's best for him to it's better for him to say yes, and so the player who makes the proposal would do the best to offer 0 or perhaps $1 to the other player. Offering more than that is not optimal. To offer him 50 is not optimal because he will say yes even if I offer him only 40. So the only subgame perfect equilibrium here is that the offerer is in a very strong bargaining position and you will get almost the entire sum. Does the analysis correctly portray reality? I don't think so. The behaviors observed in experiment, and this was done many years ago by many people, in particular by Werner Guth in Germany, the behaviors observed in experiments with money, without money, with this game are very, very different from what I've just described. Let's take a look at what you did, right? You are here. Here we have the results again of the 5 countries. Again, it's quite amazing, the similarities, but there are also some differences which I will point out in a second. In all 5 countries, what we see that almost most people choose 50, but there is also interesting group of people, or I should say that usually in experiments there are 3 modes of behavior which are detected, demanding 50% of the pie of the sum, demanding something around 2/3, something bit here, and demanding nearly the whole sum, namely offering to the other party only 0 or 1. In all 5 countries, I encounter another group, namely people who offer the other guys more than 50% of the sum, actually about 20% in your university, about 17% actually offered the other person more than asking for yourself. Notice that only about something between 11 and 15%, in your university 12% of the people were behaving according to, I would call them the people who suffered from game theory. These are the people who offer the 0 or 1. By the way, the percent, because of some reason here, I have also the distribution of answers between females and males. And here there is a quite interesting difference, I think. The percent of men and women who offered 0 or 1, namely the people who suffered from game theory, is much larger among men than among women. At the LSC it was 17-10, Tilburg 16-8, Tel Aviv 14-11, UBC even larger 16-7, and here 16-9. Namely 16% of the men here chose something between, offered the other guy only 0 or 1. 9% of the women were so ungenerous. So the conclusion may be that, by the way, the average here is also, in all 5 places, the average offer of males was much lower, about 10% lower than the offer made by women in all 5 places, which is quite a remarkable fact. So what do we learn about difference? The gender issue, maybe that males are much tougher than women. I don't know. By the way, surprisingly for me at least, as an Israeli, the group of, from the men, the group of people who were the most generous were the Israelis. Now, there is some hope in the world. Now, is the description of the situation correct? I don't think so. We have adopted here the assumption that people just care about their own pocket, whereas often they care also about the piece of the cake that the other individual receives. This might explain that some people simply prefer splitting the cake or the $100 evenly rather than taking the whole cake for themselves. And even more relevant, we assume that the desires of the individuals depend only on the result, on the outcome of the negotiation, and not on what occurred up to the point that an agreement was or was not reached. Now, notice the fact that an individual needs to respond to an offer of $10 is not equivalent to choosing between $10 and nothing. Namely, if he offers me, if we could share $100 and offer me $10, of course I will say no. Right? It's an insulting offer, and what can he, I mean, why does you offer me only $10? It's crazy. Of course I will give up the $10 just to show him that next time don't do that. But if God, nature, or somebody like that offers us to split 90 to him, 10 to me, If it's a third party, of course I will say yes. I don't mind that he will get 90 as long as I get the $10. But if he offers it, it's something very different. And that difference is not captured by the standard game theoretical analysis of this game. Now, let's go to let's see how did you respond to the question when I put you in the position of responding to an offer of getting $10 out of 100. Here you were asked to imagine that there is again $100 and that somebody offers you $10 and you have to decide whether to accept or reject the offer. Sorry. Okay, so what do we have here? What we get here is the acceptance rates in these 5 countries. Here there is the acceptance rates. Notice the opposite, of course, is rejection. So about 40% of the people do reject, something between 30 and 40% of the people in these 5 countries do reject $10 when it is offered. By the way, I don't understand the 60-70% that say yes. I don't understand. Why do you say yes? But in any case, most people do say yes, but about 30 to 40% of people do reject the offer. Again, the Israelis are the lenient bargainers. Fact about life. Well, the lenient bargainers, or you can of course say the opposite. You can say that they are the most materialistic, or they have less sense of fairness. You choose the interpretation of this result. Only 30% of the Israelis rejected the $10. The LSE, it was 34. You are more or less in between in the middle. Again, the gender issue. Again, the differences between the females and males do exist. Females are, here it looks like they are tougher, namely they do reject more. They do reject more, but again, it could be interpreted differently as being less materialistic or having more sense of fairness or just being nicer. You pick the interpretation. The differences between men and females in acceptance here is probably about 4-5%, but the sample is quite huge. By the way, to the dean, notice that there are less females than males in your faculty, in your student body. But less dramatic than in other places, by the way. In any case, you will be interested to see this fact. Actually, the lowest acceptance rates that I ever seen in these groups was among the GeorgeTown females. Again, you interpret the explanation. So, does this game theory analysis provide a basis for making policy recommendations? What do you think? Of course not. I hope that nobody would dare to use game theory analysis to advise somebody to demand nearly the whole cake or the entire sum. I do know one former Israeli prime minister who perhaps learned or even reinvented the game theory analysis of the ultimatum game, and we all know what happened 3 years ago. Despite the tension between Nash equilibrium and the experimental results, game theory has become accepted as a central tool in economics, and Nash concept of equilibrium has become the conventional description for predicting behavior in what are called non-cooperative games. In the 1950s, game theory had a marginal place in economics. Von Neumann and Morgenstern's monumental book was published during the Second War and was immediately recognized as a great intellectual achievement, but the study of game theory remained at the margins of mathematics and operation research departments. Only in the 70s, game theory penetrated into the center of economic theory. Earlier, the market and competitive equilibrium were the main duo for the economic analysis, and a new pair was born, game and Nash equilibrium. From the 80s, you will find countless people saying as a mantra that game theory serves for research in a wide range of fields: oligopolistic competition and company takeovers in economics, strategic voting and negotiation between states in political sciences, the relationship between flowers and butterflies, and the evolution of animals in biology, questions of morality in philosophy, and building communication protocols in computer sciences. Even the biblical stories of the binding of Isaac and King Solomon's trial have been discussed using the tools of game theory. Game theory won media renown only in 1994 thanks to what come to be called the mother of all auctions. The FTC, not far from here, sold communication frequencies for $7 billion in an auction planned with the massive help of game theoreticians. Those bidding for these frequencies also bidders for these frequencies also hired game theory experts as advisors, and the people who planned this tender were among the most intelligent people that I know, but I have serious doubts about how helpful game theory was in planning the tender. They used indeed basic intuition and human simulations, but I at least have not seen any evidence that game theory really helped them. But this did not disturb the media, and not only there, to take this event as indisputable proof for the applicability of game theory. During all these years, when game theory flourished, Nash was sick with schizophrenia. He was hospitalized a number of times in psychiatric institutions, received insulin treatments, was cut off from the world, heard voices crowning him the king of Antarctica, and sometimes communicated with other worlds via the pages of the New York Times. November 94. I was sitting in an office in Princeton one afternoon, and my door was open, and John Nash passed through the corridor, looking for something. He entered the room and quietly tried to ascertain whether I knew the fax number of somebody from Stockholm. The number he had was only of 6 digits, and he assumed, based on the fact that telephone numbers in the US have 7 digits, that he was missing a digit. I shared with him my expert knowledge that phone numbers in Stockholm at the time have just 6 digits. He was relieved. At this point, I took advantage of the opportunity to do something that I had wanted to do for a long time, but never had the nerve to do. I mustered up the courage and handed him a copy of a book, a course in game theory that I had published that year with my friend Martin Osborne. Nash took the book and flipped through the pages. I don't think that he said thank you, by the way. He noted that he already had 2 books of game theory, and here is the 3rd book. 2 + 1 is 3. And then, while leafing through the book, he said to me, "I see that my name appears here." Winter 85. I was happy to be told that I was elected as a fellow of the Communist Society, as was mentioned here, and I looked through the long list of fellows of the Communist Society, curious to know whom do I join. I didn't find Nash. I understood that if Nash was not a fellow 25 years earlier, it could only be due to an oversight related to his mental health situation. 2 years passed before I dared to do something about getting Nash elected. I realized that if I submitted his candidacy, it would be seen as an act of defiance, but I like to be defiant. So I wrote a single sentence to describe why I was nominating him. Nash's contribution to economics need no explanation. Well, this was defiance. So the nomination was brought before a committee that was had to decide whether he will be on the ballot or not. By chance, I happen to have been a member of this committee, and the chairman of the committee wrote to me the following: "Regarding Nash, I doubt he could be elected since he is well known to have been crazy for years." The committee voted 4-1 against putting him on the ballot. I acted the year after less defiantly, and 3 of us signed the form, and etc., and we explained his contribution properly, and Nash was elected. So, what does game theory try to accomplish? Is game theory useful? The popular literature is full with nonsense about the usefulness of game theory. Here is a random example from a very respectable newspaper called Financial Times from April 02. Kofi Annan is famously active in seeking advice from a variety of sources, and recent propositions from the UN Secretary General suggest he has found a new font of inspiration as he cast about for tips on how to solve the seemingly intractable crisis, that I agree, in the Middle East. Game theory. Even Mr. Anand's language has taken a turn for the mathematical. In several of his recent speeches, the bureaucrat has called on the US to help Israel and the Palestinians abandon their logic of war for a logic of peace. Well, in contrast, Nash 51 article in Econometrica, for which he received the Nobel Prize, makes no pretensions about usefulness. Actually, in this paper he writes, as an example of the application of our theory to a more or less realistic case, we include, what do we include? Not a Palestinian-Israeli conflict or anything like that. We include a simplified poker game given below. So a poker game of 3 players is the only economic example you will find in Nash 51. Within the community of game theoreticians, there is disagreement regarding the question of the usefulness. There are those who indeed believe that the goal of game theory is to provide a good prediction of behavior in strategic situations. Al Varian, a well-known economist, wrote in a review of the movie in the New York Times in April 11, 2002, I quote, Mr. Nash's contribution was far more important than the somewhat contrived analysis about whether or not to approach the most beautiful girl in the bar. What he discovered was a way to predict the outcome of virtually any kind of strategic interaction. With all respect to Al Varian, I have no idea when he got this, where he got it. In most of the games, there are lots of Nash equilibria, and therefore the concept has little predictive value in any case. When there is a single equilibrium, there is often a great gap, and you've seen some examples between game theory predictions and reality. And on top, we have the fundamental problem, which is that shared with other fields of economics, that the difficulty and perhaps impossibility of predicting behavior when the participants, namely you, me, are exposed to the existence of the prediction. Some economists like Dixon and Nailbath believe in their power to improve what they call strategic IQ. They think that the study of game theory somehow improves the ability to behave in strategic situations, but even they don't relate to game theory as a wellspring of recommendations. Of course, there are regularities that become apparent in game theory. We've seen some already, but they are remotely related to classical predictions of game theory. One more example, the last example, is the example with the 4 boxes. The story here was that you have to put a treasure in one of the 4 boxes, and somebody will be able to open only one of the boxes, and you want to hide from him the box. You want to increase the probability that he will not find it. Of course, he wants to find the box. Very simple game. What are the results? Well, in UBC, at LSE and Israel, in all 3 places, we get results which are, I should say, of course, that the only Nash equilibrium in this game is that 4 equal probability that the treasure will be put in any of the 4 boxes. That's the only Nash equilibrium. It's very easy to see. But the results in these 3 places were very different, and they are very systematic. They are consistent with the original experiment. Namely, there is a strong tendency to choose this A. Namely, there is a strong tendency about the typical results are 20, 25, 35, 20. So there is a strong tendency to choose this A, the edel, which is the middle. There is a tendency to avoid the edges. Again and again, we get this result. So you do see some regularity, but the regularity has nothing to do with game theory. I should say, you see, the Tilburg and GTU are left empty here, and the reason is, well, even this regularity is not repeated always. And I should say, I will show you now the results of Tilburg and you. You are very strange people. And I don't have the slightest idea why did you do it to me. Namely, the results in Tilburg and GTU were different than in these 3 places. Otherwise, I could show again that there is regularity, which is different than game theory. Well, your regularity is also different from game theory, but in a bizarre, different way. These are the results. In Tilburg, somehow this B was above the A. Actually, in Tilburg, I thought maybe that the letter A, they don't like the letter A. So I asked around, and the B is not a shortcut for the fascist party or something like that. No idea why did they choose the B here, and these were a lot of students and serious students and so on. Here also, actually the number here is now, I couldn't include the last 50, 60 answers, so I think I have now about 380 responses in GTU. The A is a little bit peaks. The A here is actually more or less the numbers are now equal between the B, A, and A, but I don't get this picture. Why? If somebody here can tell me, I will be very grateful. I think that it might be the outcome that some of you did see this question in classes and responded already to something that you learned, but this does not explain, I think it still does not explain this huge difference, why the GTU is different than any other place. Now, look, it may be that these results are useful in some military missions. I mean, if there are these 4 boxes are 4 bunkers and you want to find Saddam Hussein, so try to hit him. But this is maybe useful, but it completely contradiction to the game theory prediction. The rhetoric of game theory takes bias and creates a full display of usefulness. In my view, game theory mainly identifies patterns of thinking and investigate their implications on the interaction between various ways of looking at a strategic situation. My view is that of game theory is similar to logic. If game theory is useful and practical, it's in a very indirect way. And by the way, sometimes, that's especially for the dean, I wonder why people even ask a question of game theory usability. Why should academic research be judged by its usefulness? This is the criterion for private companies, but that's a topic for a completely different lecture. 1998. For years, I thought that teaching game theory was not only not useful, but has a potential for encouraging selfishness and manipulative thinking. In 1998, I was very lucky to have a group of doctoral students in economic theory, which was gathered in Tel Aviv, and most of the participants actually were officers in the Israeli army and came in uniform to the evening seminar, which I therefore called, much to their annoyance, the officers' seminar. I propose that we take up the mission of proving that the teaching of game theory is harmful. So we wrote down a list of situations designed to test the tendency towards selfish and manipulative behavior. We asked students in Tel Aviv before and after a course of game theory to respond to a questionnaire, and we expected that the course of game theory make them more selfish and more manipulative. Right or wrong, we were not able to show anything. There was no difference between the responses of the people before and after the course. Did not have any effect. I should say that this is was a very pilot and small experiment, but I failed. So what did I find in Nash that excited me so much? We'll get to this, but first let's talk a little bit about the book and the movie. In 1994, Sylvia Nassar was a senior business correspondent for the New York Times. The announcement of the prize was a routine event in her life. One of her tasks was to explain the prize committee's remarks in layman terms to the readers. Dozens of journalists wrote about the prize. Most of them trumped game theory and tried to explain what game theory is. The Berkeley Bulletin wrote, game theory states that human behavior apparent in games such as chess and poker can be combined with mathematics to make predictions about real-world problems. The Wall Street Journal wrote in 1994 after the prize, game theory is the study of decision-making in competitive situations. It's used in designing markets and options, etc., etc. Sylvia Nassar was the only journalist, to my knowledge, who recognized that the announcement was not merely a proclamation of victory for game theory, but more importantly, a human event. She published a very long and emotional article in which she described Nash during 3 stages: young, handsome genius, a sick person, roamed in Princeton's idyllic campus, and happy ending, Nash recovers, returns to activity, and wins the Nobel Prize. The article moved many hearts, and the publisher Simon & Schuster recognized the potential in developing the article into a book. In the book, Sylvia did a marvelous job. She shows herself a journalist who runs to the far corners of the world to chase down bits of missing information in the puzzle. She managed to crack down the wall of confidentiality of the Nobel Prize Committee, and so on and so on. The book was written without Nash Corporation. In fact, he strongly objected to the writing. Why didn't he participate, cooperate with NASA? One hint we can get from what Nash himself says is a part of the, as part of the his obligation as a Nobel Prize laureate. Nash wrote in a short autobiography the following: now I must arrive at the time of my change from scientific of thinking into delusional thinking, characteristic of persons who are psychiatrically diagnosed as schizophrenic or paranoid schizophrenic. But I will not really attempt to describe this long period of time, but rather avoid embarrassment by simply omitting to give the details of truly personal type. So that may be one explanation. I have heard him say several times that the only biography of which is appropriate for him is scientific. However, this type of biography cannot yet be written because he is not completing his work. From the public perspective, the book and later the film brought the issue of mental illness and discrimination against mental patients to the attention of millions, providing hope to the patients. NAFTA's success was phenomenal, and the moral dilemma remains to be a subject for another movie. Now, the movie follows the book. See what happens, by the way, in the transformation. This was the original book before the movie, and this is after the movie. In Hebrew, before and after. December 01. I happened to be at Princeton at a dinner at the Institute for Advanced Studies, honored for Ken Billmore. The dinner featured choice wines from the fine cellar of the director of the Institute. Nash and his wife were also invited. The conversation, as usual in such boring events, some of you are students, these are very boring events, was not flowing, and someone asked Nash whether he had seen the movie, which was scheduled to play a few weeks later. He asked him how does he feel to be a star in a Hollywood movie. Apparently, Nash has been invited to a special screening of the movie a few days earlier with the film's crew at one of the big movie complexes in Manhattan. Nash excitedly described the place, the complex, the movie complex, and noted that it was the first time in his life that he had been to a movie complex like that. The movie is a fantasy, he stated. There is a difficult scene in which Dr. Nash undergoes insulin treatment. He said, grimacing as if the movie were about another Dr. Nash. His wife, on the other hand, was the opposite. She is so beautiful, she repeatedly, excitedly, referring to Jennifer Connelly, who plays the role of Nash's wife in the movie. January 02. I watched the movie with my excited family one Saturday afternoon. Overall, how many times in your life you see a movie on a person you know and with picture taken in a place that even your 9-year-old son recognizes? At the point in the movie when the espionage agent appears in Nash's life and they become involved in a wild car chase, I said to my daughter, "What's nonsense? See what Hollywood has done, turned Nash's story into an action film." Later in the movie, actually, I realized that this is the best part of the movie, because this was a fantastic trick of the movie makers, the stage where actually it is not clear, and I fell into this trap, whether the audience is in the reality of the movie or inside the wild mind of Nash. It was a wonderful illustration, so I'm told, of the state of schizophrenic mind. The movie follows the book, but there are many inaccuracies. For example, after Nash received notification that he had won the Nobel Prize, the movie shows an impressive scene, an academic ceremony of homage. Nash sits in the tea room of Fine Hall, mathematics department in Princeton, and the professors, one after the other, approach him and place a pen on the table in front of him. Let's see it.
Professor Nash. Good to have you here, John.
It's an honor, sir.
Thank you very much. A privilege, Professor. Professor. Nicely done, John. Thank you. Thank you, Ed. That was certainly most unexpected.
Very impressive, right? That's the movie. Well, I think I've been in this event. October 11, 94. On this morning, it was announced that John Nash, Sharsani, and Zelten were the recipients of the Nobel Prize. Princeton reacted to the announcement with embarrassment. Nash at the time had no formal connection to the university beyond the fact that it had been kind enough to provide him with a computer account. Nonetheless, Nash lived in Princeton, and in a university town it's very complicated to explain that someone is from Princeton and not from the university gets the Nobel Prize. Furthermore, Nash had graduated from Princeton, and at the time the only people in the world who cared about him lived in Princeton. The mathematics department at Princeton, indeed, together with the governors of the university, indeed held a reception in Nash's honor. The department tea room was half filled with mass professors, students who happened to be passing by, and a very small number of economics professors. The heads of the universities were there, and maybe even a photographer. The ceremony started late for some unexplained reason. Someone raised a glass, and very few words were said. The man of honor chose to exercise his right to remain silent. After drinking the toast, a general feeling of uneasiness pervaded in the room. Nash stood by himself in the middle of the room. Nobody approached him. He walked over to the refreshments table, where I also happened to be, and then Nash remarked, "The cookies today are better than they usually are." To the best of my knowledge, and I checked it, there is no pen ceremony anywhere, even as a metaphor. No such ceremony took place. With the initiative of Harold Kuhn, who took care of Nash during those 40 years, Nash received an offer at Princeton. He has now an ID card that allows him to enter to the faculty club, but definitely nobody refers to him as master. What happens when Hollywood tries to explain what game theory is? Let us see again one scene from the movie.
Adam Smith needs revision.
What are you talking about?
We all go for the blonde. We block each other. Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way, and we don't insult the other girls. It's the only way we win. Adam Smith said, the best result comes from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself, right? That's what he said, that's right? Incomplete. Incomplete. Okay? Because the best result would come from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself and the group.
Nash, this is some way for you to get the blonde on your own. You can go to hell.
Governing dynamics, gentlemen. Governing dynamics. Adam Smith. What's wrong?
Here we go. Careful, careful.
Thank you.
Okay, Now, you don't have to be a regular at bars to realize that there is a room for strategic thinking in situations like that. Who should I try to flirt with? Of course, it depends on my expectation about my friend's actions. So, to keep things simple, let us focus on an example involving only two young men, and one blonde and many browns. And let's see the matrix. So what's going on here? So Bonnet. Nash says that his friend to his friends that if everyone makes a move on the brunettes, then it will be better for everyone than if both approach the blonde, since they will at least win the brunette, and perhaps even the blonde will become jealous and turn to one of them. So if I choose brown, he chooses brown, the result is brown. Now, blonde. Well, if both approach the blonde, they will lose both the blonde and the brunettes, and that's very. I mean, there is no picture here. It's very sad. Now, brown and blonde. If both approach the blonde. By the way, the movie is not very clear, and this is very difficult. If we would have more time, I would show you again, because it's not easy actually to follow what's going on in this scene, in spite of the fact that it was considered to be quite an important scene in the movie. But in any case, from the sentence at the end of the scene, when Nash friends suggest that Nash might be trying to trick them, it's possible to infer that what the movie means is that the one who makes the move would win the blonde, while his friend would have to suffice with the brunette. So I choose the brown, he goes on the blonde, I get the brown and very envy my friend. I go on the blonde and he on the brown, then the happy end. So that's more or less the situation, right? Now, if every guy feels that it would be best for him to spend the night with the brunette and envy his friend rather than remain alone, namely that this is better than this is better than this, then the game turns into what we call chicken. And it has actually two equilibria. One which is Nash approaches the blonde and his friend settles on the brunette. That's equilibrium because nobody can deviate and gain. And the other, of course, is the symmetric. Nash settles for the brunette and his friend chooses the blonde. So these are the two equilibria for this game. Now I ask you actually to address a similar problem. I should say that this was mainly done for fun. So you remember that. And now what were the results? What did you choose? Well, you see, to keep tension, you don't appear yet. What's the result? I mean, well, I don't know. You see, the LSE men are... what does it mean to approach the blonde? It's probably to be more risky or to be more daring or something like that, right? To have more courage. It's not surprising. The English are the worst. Wait a second. You might have surprises because I didn't show you what's going on here. And by the way, that's true also about the LSE women here. You see, they are less dairy. And now, I should say just for fun. No, don't take it seriously. So what would it mean here? If the lower the number, if you appear here, it means you don't take chances. If you appear here, it means you are very brave men or women. But by the way, okay, so... These are real facts, you know. By the way, don't, you see, some of you may be very excited about the Israeli women here. But let me tell you the truth. I told you that actually the Israel group consists of 3 groups. Tel Aviv, my university, Be'er Sheva, which is in the south, and Technion, which is in Haifa. Now, the results here are very high, actually, because of the Technion. And the Technion actually somehow got a very high number, but the women there, actually, most of them were retired women so that's... Now, the explanation given in the movie for this situation is vague and confusing. Nash says that he has discovered a contradiction to a principle due to Adam Smith. He says, in the end, Adam Smith said that the best outcome for the group comes from everybody's trying to do what's best for himself. He was wrong. The best outcome comes from everybody trying to do what's best for himself and the group. That's a quotation from the movie. I'm not sure that this is indeed Adam Smith's message, but let us put this aside. It's another lecture. The main problem with this scene is that the quotation of Nash has nothing to do with Nash, the fact and not with the scene. The fact that the bad results could follow if every person does what is best for him is not simulated in this bar situation. As I've said, this bar situation actually is chicken and not something else. And actually the Nash equilibrium of the game, which is described above, is actually efficient. So this game does not show the point. Actually, the insight attributed to Nash in the movie is usually simulated by the prisoner's dilemma, a game that much too often, may I say, been used to illustrate game theory. To the best of my knowledge, Tucker was the one, actually Nash supervisor, was the one to first formulate the prisoner's dilemma, and it has no connection with Nash's contribution to game theory. So one mistake follows the other. But the most significant inaccuracy in the movie comes at the end of the movie. NASA writes at the end of the article, what will Nash do now at 66? He's past the age when most mathematicians do their best work, but the researcher he now talks to say that he's interested in the major unsolved problems and that he has learned to use the computer in ingenious ways. That's in Nash's article. NASA exaggerates with the happy ending, and probably this sets the tone for the movie. Nash in the movie is portrayed as someone who has succeeded in controlling the voices that appear to him, as someone who offers his wife a white kerchief as expression of discovering the real taste of life, and in the academic sphere as someone who has returned to teach. October 01, Nash lectures at the Princeton Seminar on Economic Theory. He was very nervous, and up to the last moment it was not clear whether he would stand up to the pressure. The lecture began with a presentation of a slide showing the results of a calculation he had made. Just calculation. I don't know what Nash calculated, but he presented the solution to the precision of 20 digits past the decimal point. It was said, I consoled myself by recalling news reports in my country with survey results to the thousandths of a percent with a sample of 73. It was a bit similar, but less dangerous. Afterwards, Nash began to talk about his ideas. You could tell he was thinking about some sort of non-cooperative game that would serve as a solution for cooperative games. You could tell that he had some sort of picture in his mind that was difficult for him to explain and completely impossible for us to extract. I wouldn't be surprised if great ideas are still running through Nash's mind. Nash remains a person who thinks very differently. He still has the crucial characteristics of the brilliant scientist, namely one who finds a link in what seems unconnected and a causal relationship in what seems unrelated. But we shouldn't be confused. Not every incomprehensive thought is brilliant. If it were up to me to choose an ending for the movie, I would opt for a sad end, perhaps in the spirit of what Nash himself writes about himself. The big thing, he says, is that a human has the opportunity and the experience of existence and life, and he or she may opt for reincarnation or to go to heaven when the life is indeed over the history. Nash did not and will not return to teaching. He's a person who landed here after 30 years on other planets. Is he happier? I think so, though in his autobiography he insists that during the operation process, he also lost something. He describes the return to thinking rationally again in the style that is characteristic of scientists. This is not entirely a matter of joy, as if someone returned from physical disability to good physical health. One aspect of this is that rationality of thought imposes a limit on a person's concept of his relations to the cosmos. So happy and less happy. So what is it about Nash's work? In my opinion, the best word to describe it is beautiful. The greatness of Nash equilibrium is not that it precisely describes a law of human behavior, but rather that it describes beautifully, in a formal way, a type of consideration that we use or might use when thinking on strategic situations. It may or may not approximate reality, and we saw some examples where it is or it's not. But it certainly describes a possible way in which individuals sometimes look at reality. What either in game theory? To me, at least, it is just interesting and, again, beautiful. The same interest and beauty that we find in philosophy and mathematics and logic and literature, if this can also, in some way that I'm unaware of, be useful, then all the better. But this is not what I'm looking for in game theory. What either in the story of John Nash? I think that we are amazed by someone who proves statements that we are unable to fathom and precisely formulate what others thought about only in rough terms. We imagine the voices he heard, the voices of angels or creatures from another world. We ask where he was for 30 years, during which he walked among us but was not here. We are frightened by what is foreign and different, but at the same time we are also attracting to what is foreign and different. The combination of crazy and genius fascinated us, as if it is an invitation for meeting with other worlds. We are looking into the story of Nash and feel that, like astronomers who look to the edge of the universe, we are looking towards the edge of our mind. I've told you today a little about game theory. Hopefully you have not taken it to be a missionary of public relations advocacy. It was not. Me, I was lucky to be present in a small part of this journey of transforming Nash from an abstract mathematical concept to more or less a human being. And as to Nash, I think that his great achievement is probably something he did not mean to achieve. We all struggle to treat someone suffering from mental illness as someone like all of us. And his story, Nash's story, brings us to be more aware of this struggle in our own mind.
Okay, thank you very much. We're a bit pressed for time because there's another occasion here at 7 o'clock. So once again, let's thank Ariel very much.